Kelley Ford, our new friend of the Grum, man behind K Ford Ratings, and having to participate in this segment under duress.
Yes.
Apparently, a truck has hit a power pole in your neighborhood, and you're out of power right now.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. I am safe. Everyone in my family's safe.
Good.
But yes, apparently there was an accident. We've got about 2,000 homes, I guess, around me without power, and I am one of them.
Oh, no.
So that means we're going to find out how just well you've memorized your numbers.
All the numbers, every game.
We got it all ready to go. I'm ready on my phone.
Well, that's awesome. We have been tracking this since the beginning of the season. And, of course, now we are here at game week in Nebraska with Nebraska and Indiana. This was a game that, according to your win expectancy, was in the mid-60s win percentage for Nebraska at the beginning of the year. And now it is sitting at 28%. And so Indiana is the favorite in this game, not only according to Vegas, but according to your power rankings as well. How much of this is predicated solely on what the Hoosiers have done versus anything the Huskers have or haven't done?
Yeah, I would say the difference is largely due to what Indiana has done this year. If I look at Nebraska, you guys are, about a half game, almost a game better than my preseason win-loss expectations had for you through the first 6 games. I mean, I had projected somewhere around 4.5 games for Nebraska to have won at this point. You guys obviously have the 5, but it's Indiana that has really been upgraded by the model. More than 2 touchdowns, guys, from preseason to current. That is massive. It's number 2 in the entire country. Indiana's been upgraded this year. Nebraska, you guys have been upgraded 0.1 points. So essentially exactly what the model expected for Nebraska is what you've been. Indiana's been much, much better than we thought. And I kind of thought, in side conversations, DMs, text, my preseason numbers in Indiana, probably a little bit low, maybe 10, 15 spots. Well, as it turns out, it was probably about 50 spots in the rankings, too low for Indiana. So I think that the change in win expectancy for Nebraska in this game has everything to do with Indiana, very little to do with Nebraska. However, it should be noted, yes, I have Nebraska as the underdog, but I am projecting this to be a 1-score game. And we know in college football, those are essentially toss-ups. So Nebraska still can feel good about this game here on the road in Bloomington.
So I'm curious, Kelley, because there's been a lot of conversation this week around here that Indiana's overrated, that they haven't played anybody. So I'm curious, comparing what Indiana, kind of their profile this year, is there a comparable team in recent years that you can remember where they had a similar jump in season, and how did that team end up faring?
Wow, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think at the power level. Nobody comes to mind as a team that had this a 2-touchdown upgrade halfway through the year that the model was just way off on. Actually, you know what? Maybe USC and Lincoln Riley's first year, if you guys remember that team back 2-3 years ago now. That's a team that kind of pops off to me. The end of the Clay Helton era, they weren't necessarily up to snuff with what USC would expect. Lincoln Riley comes in, has a huge roster turnover, brings Caleb Williams with him, of course, from Oklahoma. And USC, I think we all knew was going to be better than the power ratings were suggesting. That team was aided by a lot of turnover luck and good fortune in the turnover department. Indiana hasn't been aided by that same turnover luck, I wouldn't say. But the people talking about Indiana's schedule, I absolutely agree with you. And the schedule for Indiana has not been difficult to this point. That is why in my most deserving rankings, Indiana is right now number 13, which is by far the worst for any undefeated power conference team. They're actually behind Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Texas A&M, and Kansas State, who all have a loss. In the most deserving rankings is where Indiana is. Now, this week's going to be a great test for Indiana. Obviously, Nebraska presents. Let me look quickly. Yeah, Nebraska is the best team that Indiana will have faced this year. And similarly, for Nebraska, Indiana is going to be their biggest test of the season so far.
Yeah, and Kelley, along those lines, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was the offense versus the defense, in particular, Indiana when they're on offense versus Nebraska on defense, because it would seem like that would be the biggest strength-on-strength matchup in this game. Who do you usually favor in like college football in this era when it's good on good offense versus defense?
When it's good on good, I'm going to favor the offense, especially the later that we get in the year. Generally speaking, it takes an offense longer to gel, especially a new offense, right? Like Indiana's got a new offense there under Curt Cignetti and a lot of new pieces at key positions. It takes them a little while to gel. The defense is much easier to plug and play. So as the year goes along, you favor the offense more and more. And with the way the rules are set up in football now, not just college, but the NFL, certainly it's an offensive minded rule set. And so you will favor the offenses there, but you're right. This is the strength on strength.
Yeah.
I've got Nebraska's defense as the best unit in this game, ranking number 5 nationally on that side of the ball. This IU offense is number 10 on offense. So that to me is definitely the strength on strength, the side that I'm most excited about. And if you guys were to ask me, well, what is it about this matchup that makes you think Nebraska is the underdog? And I know Vegas has it too, but Kelley, what in your numbers? One, of course, is the home field advantage that Indiana has, but 2, it's the other side of the ball. I've got the Indiana defense right now at number 39, this Nebraska offense, which I think has been much better, everyone would agree, this year than in recent years. Mm-hmm. But still right now, for me, it's coming in at number 74. So for me, that's the difference in the game, is the Indiana defense having, I'll call it, a somewhat significant edge against the Nebraska offense, and the fact that this game is in Bloomington, not in Lincoln.
Hey, Kelley, you mentioned home field. What do you usually build in terms of home field advantage? And does it differ, like LSU in a night game versus, a home game in Indiana or a home game in Lincoln, Nebraska?
You guys are asking the really good questions here. So for the first time this season, 2024, I have a variable home field built into the model.
Nice.
So in previous years, I had used, 2.2, 2.3, 2.5, whatever it was in the given year across the board. And so whether you were playing in Bloomington at noon or in Death Valley at night, it was 2.5, let's say. This year, it's variable by venue, and I don't publish that number for a couple of different reasons. I have not yet gotten to the point of varying it by time of day and also opponent, right? Because for Nebraska, let's say, I'm just looking at some home games, like your game against Colorado should get a better home field advantage than your game against UTEP. And maybe Nebraska is a bad example because you guys sell it out there every time and you're famous for that. But like LSU against Alabama at night, that's going to be better than Alabama or than LSU at home against UL Monroe, right? So I haven't gotten to that part yet. I'm hopeful that next offseason I'll be able to get to that level of detail in my home field advantage numbers.
Wow, that should be really interesting. Kelley Ford joining us, kfordratings.com. So I look at, and you quoted your most deserving, which is a straight just what have you done, who have you beaten type rating using your numbers. And you just quoted that Indiana is the worst of the unbeatens on your most deserving. Interesting that everybody's number 1 right now, Texas, is only 7th in your, or excuse me, no, yeah, 7th, and behind a couple of one-loss teams in your most deserving. What is it that the folks are seeing with Texas that the numbers maybe don't quite agree on?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's twofold, right? Because I agree, my own numbers agree that Texas is the, quote, best team in college football. I have them power rated number 1, and so if that's what the AP poll is trying to do, and I still think that there's some ambiguity with the AP poll, right? Is it a power rating? Is it a deserving ranking? Does it change as the season goes on? So that's why I have 2 distinct, separate ranking sets. Number 1, power rated Texas. Number 7, most deserving ranked Texas. Because if you look at Texas's schedule, I mean, who have they actually beaten, right? Of course, Michigan isn't as good as we all thought. That was a road game. You're going to get credit for going on the road. But now I have Michigan power rated number 31. Oklahoma, a team that many people thought coming into the year might be able to make some noise, including myself. I projected them 8-4, though, because the schedule's so difficult. They're a team that, from a ranking standpoint, probably isn't getting enough love. I still have them power rated number 19. Now, they blew the doors off them. Outside of those 2 games, though, I mean, Mississippi State, power rated number 67. And then you've got 3 sub-100 teams, Colorado State, UTSA, and ULM on the resume. So for me, as I look at it, who have you beaten? Texas has looked good in their wins, but their quality of opponents, their schedule difficulty faced, just doesn't quite measure up right now in my numbers to Oregon, BYU, Penn State, Iowa State, Miami, all undefeated teams above them. And then also even Georgia, with a loss, has a more impressive record relative to expected than Texas so far. Of course, that's a huge game this week. And I know all eyes in Nebraska will be on Bloomington, as will the country. A lot of eyes are going to be in Austin, Texas for that Georgia-Texas game as well.
Yeah, and Kelley, I wanted to ask you about that because I cannot imagine that Georgia has gone into too many games in recent years with only a 23% chance of winning, but that's where the numbers find themselves in on your website right now. I wonder, given what you just said about Texas, my theory was going to be this is probably more of an upgrade on Texas than it is a downgrade on Georgia, but am I wrong in that initial assertion?
I actually tweeted about this just today because somebody said, "Wait a minute, you don't have Texas Georgia as a one score projected spread." And I went back and looked, and this even caught me by surprise a little bit, guys. I actually have Texas as a 10.5 point favorite at home against Georgia, and I had to go look at the line. I think it opened, -1 or 2. It's climbed all the way up to 4 or 5 now, and I think it's still climbing. So I think people have been not that my model is driving anything. I think people are looking at this game more deeply now, though, saying, "Man, Texas is really looking good. Georgia maybe not." You asked, is it a function of Texas or Georgia? It's almost equidistant here. I have downgraded Georgia since the preseason 6.3 points, so almost a touchdown. That's among the bottom 20 nationally in terms of upgrades, downgrades. Texas, on the other hand, has been upgraded 6.4 points, so almost the exact same amount in the positive direction, which puts them in the top 20 nationally of upgrades. So Texas has been upgraded. Georgia has been downgraded. You throw in the home field advantage, which, again, is variable for the first time this year, and Austin, Texas is a pretty good one. That's how I get 10.5. It's really hard to stomach and to view that because Georgia has been such a dominant program the last few years, but that's what the numbers are telling me. And if I've learned anything in the 6 or so years doing this, is the model is right more than it's wrong. So I'm certainly looking at that line right now of Texas -5 or whatever it is, and really raising an eyebrow because I think Texas might be in for quite the victory this weekend.
Kelley Ford joining us on the 42 Degrees The Source hotline. Alabama, Tennessee, third Saturday in October. This truly is the epitome of a coin flip game because you've got it right now projected at a 53% Tennessee win. Have the last couple of weeks, basically the last 6 quarters plus an overtime, has that changed any view in your numbers about how Alabama has looked versus what the numbers say?
It has, but it's actually changed it for both of these teams, guys. So one of my favorite features about the team projections, and I really like this part of the website and of the dashboards that I put out there, if you look in the bottom left corner, there's a section I call form.
Yes.
And it tells you from a power rating standpoint, has this team been upgraded or downgraded in the last week, the last 2 weeks, the last month, and then over the course of the season, so since the preseason. And if you look at both of these teams in the last 2 weeks, and let's look at Alabama, that includes a 2-point win against South Carolina and a 5-point loss at Vanderbilt. They've been downgraded in the power rating model 5 points in the last 2 weeks. That no team out of 134 FBS teams has been downgraded more in the last 2 weeks than Alabama. But for Tennessee, their last 2 weeks, which includes an overtime win at home against Florida and a 5-point loss on the road to Arkansas, they've been downgraded nearly 4 points, which is number 128 out of 134 teams. So these are two teams that over the course of the last 2 weeks are among the worst informed teams in all of college football. Now, of course, these are still top power rated teams. Alabama's number 3, Tennessee's number 7. So something's got to give here, but neither one of these teams is playing very good football as they come into this game and what is one of the greatest rivalries in college football. This game's got a watchability score of 9.9 out of 10 for me. So I think it's going to be a really good game. I think it's going to come right down to the end. And right now, yes, my numbers ever so slightly give Tennessee a 53% win expectancy edge.
And real quick, Kelley, just to clarify in those form numbers. So like, for example, again, looking at Tennessee last week, they've been downgraded 1.2, but for the season, they're still at 5.9. That's points. What is that number exactly?
Great question. And yes, that is points per game in football terms. So It's on my power rating scale, which is, points above or below FBS average. So right now, for example, let me use Nebraska. You guys have a power rating right now, if I look at it, of 7.6. That means my model would favor Nebraska by 7.6 on a neutral field against the average FBS team. When I say Tennessee's been downgraded 1.2, that's 1.2 points per game based on their performance last week against Florida.
Perfect.
Kelley, one more from me. Speaking of teams that have had poor performances, though they have come in dubs, and that is Miami. They have had a perplexing last few weeks. Of course, the Virginia Tech Friday night thriller, the comeback win over Cal, to the point now where Clemson is actually your top-ranked team in the ACC. Again, I'm going to ask a similar question to one I asked earlier. How much of this is upgrading Clemson versus downgrading Miami? Because I know that both are playing a large part, because Clemson, after that Georgia ass whooping, they have really come on strong.
They certainly have, and I do have Miami power rated number 9 in the country. Clemson's number 10, so ever so slightly still lean Miami, but you're right in terms of projecting forward my projected conference wins. Clemson has now eclipsed Miami just ever so slightly, and again, that's probably because Clemson is already 4-0 in conference play, Miami only 2-0. But yes, if you look at the recent trends here, Clemson over the course of this season has been upgraded almost 4 points, so that even incorporates that beat down against Georgia to start the year. And Miami, yes, they've been downgraded in the last 2 weeks by almost a point. But if we go back to the start of the season, they've been upgraded nearly a touchdown. So my number's too low on Miami coming in. Maybe we've seen a little bit of regression back to the mean here. Of course, Miami was off this past week. They've got a huge matchup on the road at Louisville this weekend. That's going to be a very interesting game for sure. It has a watchability score of 9.7 out of 10. So I think that's going to be a great game in the ACC.
Oh, by the way, if you look at Kelley's watchability ratings, this week has more games rated over 9.0 than any other week, including last week where there were 6. But this week, Nebraska, Indiana, and Kansas State, West Virginia, both get 9.1s. You have a perfect 10, Georgia and Texas, and a 9.9, as Kelley mentioned, Alabama and Tennessee. Kelley, hope you get your power back soon.
Yes.
And we really appreciate it. Thanks for the education. It's always fun to catch up with you. We love quoting your numbers every single week. Appreciate the time, and enjoy the games this weekend.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, and good luck to Nebraska.